Good evening and welcome. This is a very, very special evening. Firstly, because we hear the story of Rabbi Bamberger on our Remembrance Day of Yom Hashoah. We find Walter Benjamin, who himself was a victim of the Holocaust, said the tradition is an acoustical experience. We have to listen to the generations before us. So tonight we have come to listen to you. Tell your story of Danish Jewry and the Sleepless Night. But it is also a very special evening for me, and I thank Rabbi Dr. for giving me the honor of interviewing Rabbi Dr. And I'm sure many of you are asking the question, why am I here? Well, you know, if I may call you that, I began to count up the years that we have known each other. And I figured out that I would need at least 7 hands, each with 5 fingers. So it's been over 35 years since I have considered myself, at least, a friend of Rabbi Bamberger and of his entire family. I have spent many a Shabbat, many a Yom Tov in his home. His wife, Dina, of blessed memory, was a wonderful, wonderful person and took me in whenever she could. So for that reason, too, it is very special for me to be here. I have met his Danish relatives, I've met his relatives who live here in the United States, so I feel a part of your family. And I thank you for telling the story in my presence. So let us begin by setting the context. What was Jewish life like in Denmark when you were growing up? When did the Jews come to Denmark?
Well, let me first say thank you for the kind introduction, Dr. Bevan, Ruth, and to Robert Danac also. I would like to say thank you to you. What we are talking about here tonight is a personal experience that I have had close to 70 years ago, but to me it is as if it happened today still. My family has been living in Denmark for 9 generations, and some of them came already in 1700. My grandmother, from my mother's side, was born in Copenhagen in 1850. And her mother was already born in Copenhagen. So I'm the 9th generation that were living in Denmark. See, in Denmark we never had a Jewish ghetto or a Jewish street. We could live wherever we wanted. You could go to school, and I went to a non-Jewish school. I never went to Yeshiva because there was no Yeshiva in Denmark. Like there was nothing in Sweden. There was nothing in Norway. In Norway, they only permitted in 1,000 Jews in the end of 1800. And there was one government in Norway that prohibited Friede, but not because of the Jewish law, but simply because it was cruelty to animals. That there were not even Jewish people there, and they prohibited Friede, not knowing what they were doing. And that law still applies. But in Denmark, we had Friede, we had everything that was part of the Kila Kedosha. There was a shul with the mechitza, with the balcony upstairs. I became bar mitzvah in the big synagogue in Gestalter, which still stands this day today. I went to a private school, and later on I went to the gymnasium. My parents had an open business where, of course, the store was closed on Shabbos and Yontif. We grew up in a very sedate place. There was no thing, because you were Jewish, that made any difference. Whether you were Jewish or not Jewish didn't mean a thing. There were certain things that I had never seen before I came to America. And I always like to tell that story. There were certain things, there were 3 things I had never seen before I came to America. The first thing was I had never seen a colored person, a black person. In Denmark, in Norway, in Sweden, there was no such thing. I'd never seen it when I came to America. The second thing, I had never seen anything that had to do with Catholicism, nuns, priests. There is no such thing in Denmark. It's Protestant, and if somebody is studying to become a priest, he's not playing with a full deck of cards. Who would become a priest in Denmark? Nobody would do that. And finally, the last thing I had never seen before, this was this funny shaped Coca-Cola bottle. Those were the three things I had never seen before I came to America. But I grew up in a very quiet neighborhood, and we had everything which we needed. And when you ask me what was life in Denmark at that time, you could go wherever you wanted. There was no Jewish ghetto, there was no Jewish street. You could have anything you wanted, and you could be wherever you wanted.
How do you come for that there was no discrimination?
There was no
discrimination.
Discrimination?
How do you
There was
come?
no discrimination whatsoever. As a matter of fact, some of the earliest Jewish people that came to Copenhagen, to Denmark, there were Spanish and Portuguese Jews. We still have people today, yes, there's still people there by the last name of Henricus, which is not a Danish name. We had Bamberger, we had Schneier. They were all Portuguese or Spanish Jewish people who had come, were invited by the Danish king to come to Denmark and to live there.
But why was there no problem for the Jews in Denmark?
There was...
Why? How do you come for that? That it was so free?
Because originally the Jews didn't come there sneaking over the border. They were invited by the king. The king invited the Jewish people from Holland, from Amsterdam, to come to Copenhagen. Why? Because the Danish king saw what took place in Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, in Holland, they had created a place in the New World called New Amsterdam. So the Danish king said, if they have a place, New Amsterdam, in the New World, I want to have a place, New Copenhagen, in the New World. But they didn't start with the city. They conquered 3 islands, St. Thomas, St. Jan, and St. Croix, in the Caribbean. And before the First World War, Denmark was a little short of money, so they sold it to the United States for $25 million. That's why today the American Virgin Islands, St. Croix, St. Thomas, and St. Jan, actually were Danish colonies, and Denmark sold it to the United States for $25 million. It has gone up in price since then.
The year 1943 was a watershed. What happened in that year?
See, we were occupied in 1940 by the Germans. And there's always been not a very good relationship between Denmark and Germany. It was not a very good relationship. There was always friction because of the 2 duchies of Schleswig-Holstein. And Schleswig-Holstein sometimes belonged to Denmark and sometimes belonged to Germany. See, originally the Danish border was Altona. That's the reason why all the rabbis in Altona, Rabbi Eibschitz and Jakob Edlinger, and all the rabbis in Altona, they had to be confirmed by the king of Denmark. They had to submit their application to the king of Denmark, and he said, yes, you can be the rabbi in Altona. When they lost the war in 1849, Altona became Germany, and Schleswig was then divided after the Treaty of Versailles. The northern part belonged to Denmark today, and the southern part belongs to Germany. But, Denmark was never really into the idea of having colonies. Denmark has today a colony called Greenland, belongs to Denmark. Denmark has for the longest time wanted to get rid of it. Take care of yourself. They don't want to. They want to belong to Denmark. They get policemen and they get fire, they get taxes, they get everything from Denmark. Denmark said, you can speak for yourself. The same applies to the Faroe Islands. Belongs to Denmark. Denmark said, go your own way. You can have your own rules, do whatever you want. They don't want to. They want to belong to Denmark because they feel secure. The same applied to a certain extent to Iceland. Iceland was also part of Denmark. The king of Denmark was also the king of Iceland until 1940, when the Germans occupied Denmark. Then they said, the Danish ambassador to Washington said that today we give America the chance to take over Iceland, and they established a NATO outpost in Keflavik. The NATO outpost is still there, and it is known as a NATO outpost, not the United States. I have been to Iceland many times, and there are no Jewish people in Iceland, except the first lady of Iceland. She's Jewish, but otherwise she's a Bulgarian. Otherwise, there are very few Jewish people. They have never met anybody there, although I have traveled extensively in Iceland. Iceland then became an independent nation with a president and separate from Denmark, and they're no longer part.
Where does Sweden fit into this?
Where's what?
Sweden.
Sweden was something entirely different. You see, when Germany occupied Denmark, we were occupied right after Poland. In 1939, Germany occupied Poland. In 1940, they occupied us. In April 9th, Denmark and Norway, but they didn't occupy Sweden. Sweden remained neutral because they needed a neutral country in Scandinavia. They needed a neutral country in Middle Europe, Switzerland, Spain. They were all basically neutral. So Sweden was a neutral country, and that was the reason why we were able to get later onto Sweden.
Give us a picture of the occupation. What did it mean for the average Dane, and what did it mean for the Jews?
To where? To
the occupation.
The occupation. When we were occupied in 1940, nothing happened. The Germans said, we do not mix into the internal affairs of Denmark. The king can remain king, and the army can remain army, police can remain police. We are only there to protect you against Britain and France. And so it was for 3 years. We had everything except they had our windows darkened because they shouldn't, the British and the French shouldn't see where there was light. So there we had the lights, we had the windows covered with black paper during the day. But otherwise, there was services went on. We had a Lulav and an Essex, even though we were occupied. We were occupied by the Germans. We still had a Lulav and Essex. We were able to bake matches in 40, 41, and 42, and 43. We had all of the things were all right in Denmark till October 1943. That is when the whole thing changed because of the sabotage that had started. You see, in 1943, the question was whether or not the Germans would start with the Jewish people or not. And that became a very difficult point. They went to the king, Christian X, and they said to him, you know, we're going to introduce the Nuremberg laws. And the king said that if you do that and you force the Jewish people to wear the yellow star, I will be the first one to wear it also. And the entire royal house will wear the yellow star. So we never wore the yellow star. The king did not wear the yellow star. There was a whole discussion some years ago by the University of Indiana. There was a scholar there who wrote about it, that there's a myth that goes around that the king wore a yellow star. The king of Denmark never wore a yellow star, and I did not wear a yellow star either. I did not wear a yellow star. But in order to understand what it meant to live under German occupation and to understand the Holocaust, I want you to understand something. Unless you have faced a German soldier with a gun and a vicious sword, you don't know what the Holocaust is all about. A German soldier with a gun and a vicious sword, that's the day today I tell you, I don't like dogs. In any form or fashion, any size, any color, I don't like dogs, period. When I see one, I go on the other side of the street. I don't want anything to do with dogs. And the second thing, what I also learned from that occupation was, I don't like to be threatened. You see, the Germans, they threaten you. If you don't do that, we'll take care of it. You don't make no long stories. I don't like to be threatened by anyone. You can talk to me in a nice way, but don't threaten me. That is not the way to do it. I might have a hang-up about that, but that's the way it is. And that's what's left over from the time when we lived under German occupation.
Your family gave me this pin, which is of the birds of Copenhagen.
Yes.
Could you tell us about those birds of Copenhagen?
There was a Danish writer, his name was Ruth Bevan. He wrote a famous poem, and he started with Fugl flyv over Furesøen, bird fly bird over the lake of Furesøen. And the birds became very, very popular. Actually, we are talking about big birds. We are talking here about the Royal British Air Force. That was the real birds that we are talking about. You see, the Royal British Air Force, they were so famous with their Spitfires airplane that the Germans had occupied a house, a high-rise in Copenhagen with 8-9 floors called Dagmarhus. And on the top floor, they put all political prisoners, that in case the British Air Force would bomb the house, then the first to die would be the Danish political prisoners. I remember one Friday afternoon, it took place within 5 minutes that British Air Force Spitfires, they flew into Copenhagen, bombed Dagmarhus on a slant. The top floor wasn't touched, and the rest broke down. And all the political prisoners on top, they were saved. The British knew about that. And that's the reason why afterwards, everybody walked around with 3 rings. A yellow, a white, a blue, and a red circle. You had it on coats, you had it on shoes, you had it on walls, everything, because that was the insignia of the Royal British Air Force. Blue, white, and red. They had it on hats, they had it on ties, they had it on shirts, on dresses. Every place you saw the same, and of course that gave the Germans really something. They didn't like that at all. Blue, white, and yellow. Blue, white, and red. Continuously they saw these 3 colors, which was the insignia of the Royal British Air Force, the Spitfires. And they were so upset whenever they saw that they passed a law that you cannot have 3 circles with that color anymore. And people laughed at it. Now we are occupied, not only we, but all the occupied colors, red, white, and blue. You cannot have that combination of colors.
Tell us about that last Rosh Hashanah in Copenhagen.
The last?
Rosh Hashanah. The last Rosh Hashanah.
The last?
Rosh Hashanah.
Yontif. Rosh Hashanah.
I forget you.
The last Rosh Hashanah when your mother...
Oh, the last Rosh Hashanah, yes. The last Rosh Hashanah, you see. What happened was that on August 29th, Germany declared martial law in Denmark. That meant you couldn't go out anymore in the evening at 9 o'clock, and you had to be inside till 6 o'clock in the morning. And they had made a rule that on Rosh Hashanah night, they would take care of the Jews. They would arrest all the Jews and send them to Theresienstadt, the concentration camp. Now there was a German shipping agent, his name was George Stuckwitz. He had, as a young man, he was in Denmark, and he had learned there, was not Jewish, and he flew to Sweden and said to Sweden, are you ready to take the Jews of Denmark, because the Germans, my Germans, are going to ship them to the concentration camp. And Sweden says, yes, we will take them. So, and from Erev Rosh Hashanah, in the morning, the rabbi in the synagogue said, do not go home and stay home tonight. The question was, where do you go? Where are you going to go? We went to a good friend of my father, a businessman. He took us in. Now the question was, do you believe that something would happen? He had been living 3.5 years under German occupation, and nothing had happened. Why should something happen out of a Friday night? Over 600 people believed nothing would happen, and they were taken. They were arrested by the Germans, shipped to Theresienstadt, 646 people to be exact. 72 of them died. 2 children were born in Theresienstadt, and the rest came back after the war, back to Denmark. We stayed by this good Christian friend, Rosh Hashanah. That was the only year I did not hear the Kirchhofer, in 1943. 1943 I did not hear. We didn't have a meal, we didn't get the Kirchhofer. That's why every year I hear twice. I have somebody blowing it for me once more for 1943 when I didn't hear the Kirchhofer. We stayed by the good friend. Rosh Hashanah was Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. We could not get out. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Wednesday, my parents said we have to get out from here. And we got in contact with the underground. And the underground said tonight at 6 o'clock there will be a car in front of that house. Don't ask any questions. Just go downstairs into the car, and the car will take you up north. And that's what we did. We came up to a tile factory, and there were gathered more than 200 Jewish people. And the question was, how do we get from Denmark to Sweden? And they arranged with fishing boats. That's why the Jews of Denmark were saved on fishing boats. You can still see some of the rowboats in the museum in Washington, D.C. There's a rowboat where we were into them, took them out to a trawler, and then crossed. We were very happy. That night, there was a lot of clouds and no moon, because otherwise the Germans would have seen what took place. And within 2 weeks, over 6,500 Jewish people were brought from Denmark to Sweden in fishing boats, in rowboats. We all got there. But I want to tell you something, Ruth. That after we left here for the film, my mother had set the table for 17 people. Everything was set. And then we returned after 1.5 years, close to 2 years, the table was still set. We found everything in our home the way we had left it here for the film. We left here for the film in 1943, and we came back the 28th of May, and the table was still set. Yes, the potatoes had grown a little bit, yes, and the soup was right. But anyway, the table was still set. And the same night, we slept in our own beds, and life continued the way we had done it before.
How did you make your way to America?
How did I get to America? Well, I got to make my forefathers had learned in the Yeshiva in Bamberger. They had learned in Poland and Lithuania, and I wanted to go there, but of course there was no more yeshivas left over. So I wanted to go to the Islamic Yeshiva in Jerusalem. But Britain at that time issued a white paper that no single Jew is permitted to enter Palestine. I use the word Palestine because it was called Palestine until 1948 when it changed to Israel. They would not let any Jew, and I was not going to fight there, I was not going to go to the Haganah or anything of that sort. They did not permit any Jew to enter Palestine. That's the reason why I got to learn in Baltimore first and later on in Wyoming.
As you look back on that whole experience, are there still unanswered questions that you have about it?
Why did it happen to us? Is that what you're asking?
Any unanswered questions about the whole experience?
I have often thought about this. Why was it that we in Denmark, we're the only country where the Jewish people were saved by the Christians? Why is that? Why were we saved? Were we better Jews than the Jews in Poland, in Holland, in Belgium, in France? Not to talk about Lithuania, any place. Were we better Jews? Were we more observant? I don't think so. I think it had to do, and I often thought about it, that it most probably had to do with the geography between Denmark and Sweden. I wanted to know something. Sweden today, you can have your feelings about Sweden, but I still get a pension from Sweden every month because in 1944 I taught some children in Sweden. And for that, Sweden pays me a pension. It's not much I could take you out for lunch with. But I get every month, I get a check from Sweden as a pension that I taught children in Sweden in 1944. So Sweden's very good. After 70 years, they still pay me a pension. And I know other people who also get it. I think it had to do with the spirit of Scandinavia. The spirit of Scandinavia is different. We are happy-go-lucky people. We don't take everything that serious. We are liberal-minded to all our fellow human beings. We are very, very liberal-minded. I can tell you, I saw outside they have the picture, whatever you call that, from my uncle and aunt. He was a minister of foreign affairs. He was an Orthodox Jew. He never went to the ministry on Shabbos or Yom Tov. The wife wore a shaver. My aunt, his children, my cousin, maybe some of you knew Dr. Shepherd, that used to live up here on 261st Street. She was my cousin. I still have cousins living in Denmark today. I still have cousins living there. You could go wherever you wanted. I think it had to do with this liberal spirit of the people of Scandinavia that we were able to survive to this very day and to be saved during these terrible years that we were occupied by the Germans.
Are there any other reflections that you would like to give us tonight? Also about perhaps life in America?
Well, I would say to you that I understand that Yom Hashoah is a very, very serious day. I understand that Yom Hashoah is a very serious day. I know that about Auschwitz and Treblinka and all of the other ones. I tell you, while we were living in Denmark during the German occupation, we did not know anything. We did not know anything what took place, not in Warsaw, not the uprising. We didn't know anything. In those days there was no television, there were no computers. The only thing that we had was a radio, and the Germans, they buzzed the radio in such a way that you could not hear anything but what the Germans wanted you to hear. We have to be, in my opinion, we have to be liberal-minded to all our fellow human beings. It is true that we have certain feelings towards Israel, and that is because we have been, this is our country, Eretz Israel. The Ramban says, no, I have to be a little bit of a rabbi, the Ramban says that Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, and Am Yisrael, and the Jewish people, they are chutz l'teva, they are outside the rules of nature. We do not follow the rules of nature. We have an entirely different way of living. Our lives are different than the rest of the world. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is Einachem located Dorish also. God's eyes upon this land from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. We have to realize that we are a unique people, and we will care for each other in such a way that if somebody is in need, then we will rise up and help them. That's the message, I think, that even on a day like this, where we remember Auschwitz and Treblinka and Bergen-Belsen and all of them, even with the viciousness of the Germans, the viciousness, and they were vicious, you can still be a mensch. The way we are in Scandinavia can still be a mensch.
Thank you, Rabbi Bamberger, for sharing with us and for your words of wisdom.
Thank you so much. A few words.
No, a few questions.
All right, if there are any questions, yes?
We'll take a few questions. Please.
Rabbi Bamberger, my question, I'm over here. My question is this. Rabbi Bamberger, my question is this. Sweden took in thousands of Jews with their fishing boats during the war. And as you said, they're very liberal-minded people. My question, and it befuddles me, why Sweden today is one of the most anti-Semitic countries in Europe today. The Jews of Malmo have left. There are very, very few left. And Israel recalled its ambassador from Sweden a few months ago. So beside the fact that it is the Muslim population has increased tenfold in Sweden, why are the Jews suffering like this today? Thank you.
The Muslim.
Yeah.
Yes, it is true that today the great immigration of people from Africa and the Muslims, of course, they have come to Denmark and Sweden also. There are entire communities today that are occupied by the Muslims. The city of Malmö, where we lived while we were in Sweden, is today 80% Muslim. And in Copenhagen itself, there are parts of Copenhagen that are today Muslim. But they're being taught that the spirit of Scandinavia is different than what you have had in Turkey or in Africa or wherever you come from. See, there's a question, they bring along 2 wives, or 1 wife and 5 girlfriends, if you want to slice it, right? But they're being taught that in Scandinavia, that doesn't hold water. You have 1 wife, you have 5 children, that's fine. And we will provide you with everything else. We will even take care of your religious needs. But you have to behave like a Scandinavian and not bring along your viciousness that you have been exposed to and that you want to expose to Scandinavia that they will not tolerate.
But excuse me, if that's the case, why did the mayor of Sweden tell his Jews to leave?
Why did the mayor of Malmo, you mean? Why did the mayor of Malmo tell the Jews to leave Malmo? Why did the mayor of Malmo then? Tell the Jews of Malmo to leave.
The people of Malmö, we lived in Malmö while we were living in Sweden. And Sweden is a very, very liberal-minded country, and they have been permitted to come in here, hundreds, if not thousands of them. It is true that he also, after a while, you have an election, you can get a Muslim to become a mayor of Malmö, whatever it is, in other places in Norway also. But he will have to understand that he has to accept the spirit of Scandinavia. And I think that it takes some time, but eventually they will learn. Eventually they will learn.
Rabbi Bamberger, why don't you mention your ancestry and where you were born? So he has a very recovered ancestry that people here in this synagogue don't know about. And I mean the ancestry in Germany. You didn't mention that. That you were born, where you were born.
He wants to know.
And your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather was such a great rabbi. Don't you want to mention that?
He wants to know where your father, grandfather were born.
Okay. Let me tell you first of all that Mr. Gartman and myself, we were really the same baby carriage, okay? Believe it or not, his mother and my mother were very good friends, and I could go to his mother as I could go to my mother. I tell you the truth, we are born within 3 weeks apart, and we have known each other since we were babies, actually. So it is true that all what I was talking about was from my mother's side. From my father's side, that's an entirely different story. My grandfather was a rabbi in Würzburg, my great-grandfather was a rabbi in Würzburg, and I was born, and as you were born also in Würzburg, we grew up together, and you know what happened, we have been friends ever since we were born, actually. Except I was born 3 weeks before you. Okay.
We will take one more question, and I'm sure that Rabbi Bamberger would be happy to discuss many other questions right after Mariv, or tomorrow, or on Shabbos, for those who don't get to ask their questions tonight.
Many people, Orthodox Jews in particular, preach about how the Jews are the chosen people, they're better people than Gentiles. In light of how the Gentiles saved your life, how do you respond to those people?
Many people say that Jews are the chosen people and therefore underestimate the non-Jews. But how do you account for the fact that non-Jews saved Danish Jews?
Well, as I say to you, how do I account for the fact that non-Jewish people saved us in Denmark and it didn't take place in other countries like in Holland, in Belgium, and France? I'm telling you that I personally think it has to do with the spirit of Denmark, because we never caused problems in Denmark. We never had a ghetto, we never had a Jewish street. I went to school to a gymnasium without any Jewish people. There was one other Jewish boy there, he was another Jewish boy in the gymnasium. But there was no difference. We were not different, and they didn't come with strivers, anything of that sort. We didn't do that. Whether or not we were right or wrong, I don't know. I'm not judging what people are doing. I'm only telling you that in Denmark, there was once a famous story. There was once a Jew that smuggled himself over the border, and the police caught him. A Jew, so he didn't know what to do, so he sent a message to the chief rabbi in Copenhagen. He said, what can I do? He sent him back a message, he you Holy One, you're safe. He said, you don't smuggle yourself over the border into Denmark. Come correctly, then you won't be caught and put into a prison. Okay? That's it.
That's it for right now. I think there are going to be many questions afterwards for each of you then, so you'll handle those.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Dr.
We're going to... We're going to continue in Jewish tradition the way that we remember people who have died is on their yard site we light a yard site candle. How do you remember 6 million people who were killed? And for the last 7 decades, we've been struggling with this question. One way that we try, one way that people find meaningful, is to light 6 yard site candles. And we have our dear survivors here, each one to light 1 candle. But part of lighting the candle is telling the story for generations, for the next century. And therefore, each person who comes to light a candle is accompanied by a child growing towards adulthood from our community. I'd like to ask Rabbi Bamberger to light the first candle, accompanied by Jacob Teplitsky.
We don't. Okay, you hold on to this. Okay, we do it together. Okay. That's it. Okay, the next one. Okay. Thank you.
Paul and David Hoffman, our couple, accompanied by siblings, Suri and Aaron Zalman Rosenzak.
She's coming to bring it back.
Mrs. Lucy Lang, accompanied by Naima Fine.
Hi, who?
This young lady over here.
Hi. What's your name? Nice to meet you. Okay. Thank you.
This is Laura Oppenheimer, accompanied by Rivka Banya.
Which one? First or second?
This one right over here. And Mrs. Rita Pazalski,
Yes.
accompanied by Dahlia Apfelbaum, neighbors right across the street.
How come? Doesn't want to like that. Oh.
Please stand. Hey, Moira Chamim, Shochem Ba'amim, Hamtzei L'chol Chol, Al Kanfei HaShchina, Ma'os Kedoshim Etorim, Yezoah Rakia Masirim, Esishmos, HaKedoshim, Eatorim, Shehusu, V'sheneheru, V'shenishchatu, V'shenisrefu, V'shenibiu, V'shenechelku, V'shenigru Chaim, Al Kiddush Hashem, Baruch Shal Shekiloseinu, Yisraelim, V'yad Haskoras Nishmosehem, V'ygaleh Yedem, Teheimanu Chosun, Lochem, Al Rachamim, Yasirei V'seisek Nafo, Li'olamim, V'yitzro, B'yitzro, Ha'chaim, Es Nishmosehem, Alinoi, Unachason, V'yanuchu B'shalom, Al Mishkelosehem,
Vias HaMoshiach, Ani Ma'amin. Vias HaMoshiach, Vias HaMoshiach, Ani Ma'amin. Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin. Me'yemuna Shleimo, Vias HaMoshiach, Vias HaMoshiach, Ani Ma'amin. Vias Ani Yisrael, Im kol zeh, Ani Ma'amin. Vias Ani Yisrael,